if there's an unanswered question, I want it to be answered. I almost felt guilty if I didn't answer the question. So, like, for example, I did a Chronicle of Philanthropy webinar a couple of years ago on engagement. There were like 180 questions that people had. And, for a webinar, you only have time for like 3. So I went through, they sent me all of the questions. I don't know, I think I maybe took 2 or 3 weekends and I answered 76 of the questions. And I put that on my blog and I sent it out in emails like, I've answered your question. Like, you don't have to worry about not having this knowledge.
Welcome to the PM Podcast, brought to you by Evertrue Studios, the show that takes you inside the lives of thought leaders, innovators, and changemakers in fundraising, philanthropy, and civil society. I'm your host, Jay Frost. My guest today is Jen Newmeyer, Senior Director of Digital Fundraising Strategy at PBS, founder of CharityJen, author of Digital Fundraising Transformation, and recipient of the 2026 AFP Skystone Partners Prize for research on fundraising and philanthropy. Jen has spent more than 20 years helping nonprofits modernize fundraising programs, strengthen donor engagement, grow audiences, and build more sustainable strategies for the digital age. At PBS, she leads national digital fundraising strategy and transformation efforts supporting more than 150 member stations across the country. Before joining PBS, Jen directed digital membership at WHYY, led integrated fundraising at PBS North Carolina, and built the first comprehensive digital fundraising and engagement program at the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, where online revenue grew from $150,000 to more than $1 million annually. She has raised more than $10 million online, managed multi-million-dollar budgets, led teams, presented nationwide, served on 3 AFP chapter boards, launched a podcast, published a newsletter, and written 2 books on digital fundraising transformation. Recorded live in the Exchange at AFP Icon 2026, this conversation explores Jen's path into fundraising, why digital strategy still lags, and how nonprofits can build more integrated, experimental, and resilient fundraising programs.
Jen, thank you very much for taking time to talk with me, and congratulations on this prize, the Skystone Prize, for your book.
Yes, thank you. It's really an honor. I have to say, my book is so tactical, and I submitted the nomination last year, and I was like, let me look at some of the other award winners, and they're very academic, and so it was a little intimidating, and I was like, oh, well, I just put so I submitted it and kind of forgot about it. So when I got the news, I literally was stunned. Just such an honor, and I did a presentation to the foundation board and to the global board, and just really expressing how valuable and how amazing it is that this channel, digital fundraising, is sort of elevated and recognized in this way. It's just such an honor.
You've been involved in digital for a little while.
Yeah, a little while.
When did you get your start in the digital part of this world?
About 2 decades ago. Honestly, I started at a food bank back in 2006. And, back then that was sort of like the dawn of, email communications for nonprofits and social media for nonprofits, and all of this digital activity was kind of happening. And I just, realized that the first thing I did was like, we need to update our website. It was static. Nothing was and I was responsible for like processing and doing numbers and budget and that kind of thing. And I was like, we're raising $150,000 on a website that like nobody touches. Like no one's updating it. We don't even have events that we're posting. So that was the first thing that we did. We revamped the website, and then we got a partnership with Convio at the time, and started sending emails and building the email list. And then I, got the organization on social. So all of these things just naturally came together. And by the time that I left the food bank 10 years later, we went from that $150,000 to over $1 million. 1,000,03 to be exact.
You have to hold on to every dollar in memory. That is important.
That's right.
Okay, so
that's when it really started. It was way back then.
And you were trying to obviously bring not just one organization, but I guess all of our thinking into kind of a different way of thinking.
Yeah, well, what happened, what we were doing at the food bank was just so natural. And one of my colleagues, she was our grant writer, and she was involved with the AFP, and she organized these breakfasts. We used to have breakfasts they used to have breakfast for the members, and she was like, I think you should speak on social media and what you're doing an amazing job. And I was like, well, okay. And I couldn't believe how the room was just just so engaged and had so many questions, and because what we were doing, again, like I said, was just well, this is just what we do. And other people were like, wait, how is this, And so that was really when I started getting involved with AFP, when I started doing more presentations on the work that we were doing at the food bank. And then, of course, when I went into public media, that with my digital fundraising knowledge, that's when, there were barriers to overcome and skeptics, and I had to explain what we were doing and explain it again and explain it again. And so that was the evolution of the first book. And after that book came out, people were like, I'm still confused, so explain it again, put it into a different context, and so it just kind of grew over time, very, very naturally, I guess. But that's how it all started up to this point.
How did you make that move into public media?
Oh, yes. Well, so like I said before, I was at the food bank for 10 years, and, I think that at the time, I just felt like I was ready to move on. The things that we were doing, we were doing the same thing every year, and I was really looking for a new challenge. And it just so happened that the PBS station in North Carolina, back then it was UNC-TV, now PBS North Carolina, they were looking for a digital fundraising manager. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. These jobs don't come around very often. So that's when I was like, I think that this would be really fascinating. And plus, it's the PBS station, right? Yeah. I want to work, for an organization that represents Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street and all those wonderful things, So I was like, this could be really interesting and a challenge to see how I can take what all of the tactics and tools that we did at the food bank in this sector into an entirely different one and see how, that evolves. And it was a very interesting journey.
You mentioned that it was a matter of convincing people again. Now, when people hear that, they might think, but this is the world's media. They're tech savvy. They have to put things out into the airwaves, the ether, every single day. So what was the impediment there? And I have a feeling that may relate to the impediment elsewhere, but what was the impediment in getting people to think digitally at PBS?
Yeah, well, I think that there is a lot of digital advancement on the content side of things. So I think you have producers who really understand how to put together good programs that engage audiences. But translating that into fundraising tactics was totally foreign. Now, I will say that they do a great job with pledge drives. So the on-air pledge drives are, that's sophisticated strategy right there, because they've been developing it for 50, 60 years. But taking what they do on for pledge drives and for regular nonprofits, what you do in direct mail, what you do in your traditional channels, and translating that into digital, and how to reach audiences through digital platforms, digital ads, email structure, A/B testing, email content. All of those kinds of things just didn't. It was a total lack of knowledge of that area. In fact, when I first started at UNC-TV, I put together a plan, of course, and I did a presentation at an all-staff meeting. And afterwards, one of the producers came up to me, and he was like, "I just have to ask you, are you telling me that you're going to send an email and someone's going to give us money?" And I was like, yes, that is exactly what I'm telling you.
Okay. And to be fair, this is not a conversation you would have had only there, but many other places at that time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think even, so then it was really interesting because I thought, okay, well, this station clearly has, there's some there's some knowledge gaps. And what I'll do is that they were going to send me to a big PBS conference with all stations from all across the country. And I thought, this is great. I will go to this conference. I'll find out what other stations are doing. Then I'll bring it back and say, hey, guys, like, here's what other stations are doing. And lo and behold, all of the other stations were just as sort of behind the times, so to speak, as the station in North Carolina was. Like, I remember clearly there was a session on the latest great. It was something like, I don't know, they make fancy session titles, but the latest greatest thing in digital fundraising. You know, like, this is like the newest, shiny, tool or whatever in digital fundraising. I was like, oh, this is great. I'll go to the session and see what they're talking about. And the room was packed with, there must have been 200 people. It was a big conference room. And so they bring up the slides and they're like, okay, it's kind of like building it up like drum roll. Is everyone ready for the greatest thing in digital fundraising? And the next slide was email. And I was like, this was in 2016.
Oh, really?
Yes.
All right. So you're there, you're at this conference, all the stations are there. Now, this is also kind of at a pivotal moment for public broadcasting, right?
Yeah.
Or right on the verge of it anyway.
Well, and it's not there. There's really no, just because of the way that public media operates, pledge fundraising is so strong.
Sure.
For example, I was just at the M&R benchmark. M&R benchmarks came out last week, and they were talking about public media and all of there's an avalanche of funding right now. But when you look at the investment into digital advertising for fundraising, public media is the lowest of all of the sectors, way far, like -2%, like basically not doing any digital, advertising at all. But one of the comments that they made was that, well, they own the airwaves, so it's like, but if they did invest in digital, imagine how much greater they could be,
Right.
So, I think that just because of the success that they've had in other channels, there really hasn't been a focus on diversifying fundraising and incorporating digital fundraising in particular. So, plus, I think that public media also, stations have the same problems that other nonprofits have as well. They have, issues with resources. They have, technology issues. There are silos between marketing and development. And so all of these are just kind of compounded into, public media just being a very kind of unique, like a little bit of a unicorn, I would say,
So how much has changed since 2016 to today? That's a 10-year gap, but there's also this huge change in terms of what happened to CPD, what's happened to public broadcasting in general, and I know a number of stations now are on the precipice of not closing. So what has changed in terms of the understanding nationally of the importance of using digital as a way to engage with audiences, let them kind of be co-owners of this, go beyond being a member and getting a mug?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are a lot of stations that are doing really great work in the digital fundraising space. And so I work with a cohort of about 25 or 30 of them who are a little bit in the kind of the mid-range. I think this is very typical of all nonprofits also. If you have a really, really small organization, a small nonprofit, you just don't have the resources. There are some stations, like some nonprofits, where they literally have one person in development that's handling pledge drives and mail and all of that. And so it's very difficult for change to happen there. And then you have the really, really large organizations that are so siloed, and same thing happens with public media stations also, that it's very hard to kind of turn the ship.
Right.
So I work with about 30 of them who are kind of in the mid-range, in the middle.
Right.
And they're doing great work. So they're able to be nimble, flexible, try new things. And so I try to elevate those voices as much as possible for the rest of the system. We just had one station there, we have a couple of stations who are experimenting with PMAX campaigns, the AI, Google ads.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so they're, trying to find the right kind of messaging for PMAX, where to invest those dollars. I have to admit, I'm not an expert in PMAX campaigns, but they're working with a vendor that's really, helping them, just try new things and experiment, and they're, seeing some, positive results. So there are some stations that are doing really great work. If they have, if their tech stack allows, they're doing automations, for example. They're segmenting their audience and personalization and all of those things that are so important in digital that are often overlooked. Because I think sometimes when people think of digital fundraising, the first thing they think of is, email and social. Sure. And it's so much deeper, as we know, than just sending out emails and posting to social.
So, the book.
Yes.
Now, there was a book before, there's a book now. So talk about this book now. What was the genesis of it? How do you see that as being maybe different from the message you were communicating before? And what do you imagine it could bring to the field now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first book I wrote when I was still at a station. So it was really I imagined writing it to another digital fundraising manager who is coming into an organization that has to explain what digital fundraising is, how it's different than digital, especially for public media, digital content, digital operations, digital marketing, there are different, a few different flavors of what digital means, and then giving them advice on how to put together a campaign. I focused on revenue campaigns, more of the, the year-end fundraising kinds of things, and really diving into how to make that very robust for organizations. Talked a little bit about silos and collaboration, but again, it was more from the standpoint of I'm giving you advice, fellow fundraiser, of how you can make this work. Since that book came out, I'm still doing lots of presentations, involved with the AFP, I'm on the board, all those kinds of things, and people were asking questions like, I still don't know where to start. I'm still having these resource problems. I'm still having collaboration problems. Leadership won't listen to me. And also, in the first book, I focused on acquisition and revenue campaigns. With this book, I expanded it with engagement and stewardship campaigns. So I dive deep into 4 different types of campaigns. But then the other thing that I do is for implementing those, I take almost a 3-pronged sort of stages level approach. So basic, like the things that you should get in, what you should focus on first. your basic tools, and structure and skills for your team. Intermediate, like once you get the basics in place, like before you start thinking about PMAX ads, and text to give campaigns and peer-to-peer, make sure that your website, your email, your social media, and your donation form are all solid. And, that your donor pathways are, are clear, that your donation form is, efficient. So I take that 3-stage approach for those folks who are like, I don't know where to start. Mm-hmm. But there's another really big piece about this book that I recognized in just my own personal journey and growth in fundraising. During that time after my first book came out, I got my CFRE. So going through all of the materials and the study for that exam, digital fundraising is really underrepresented. And in the exam that I took, there were no questions about digital fundraising. And so then I just started to think about this when people are in development offices, in marketing and development, they're like, I just still don't understand how digital fundraising fits. It occurred to me that I think as a sector, it has not been defined. Even if you think of the giving pyramid, and I think we talked about this before, the giving pyramid starts with a donor. But in digital fundraising, acquisition is such a crucial element of that entire, online journey, online engagement journey. So what I did was I took a couple of models, the giving pyramid, the constituency circle, I expanded them with how digital fits in that. So of course with the giving pyramid and acquisition program, with constituent circles, just really defining the outer circles, the organization's universe. If you remember Rosso's concentric circles, that's the term, the organization's universe. and really diving into the wealth of data that's there. Your lookalike audiences, your website fit. Even for a website visitor, you could do retargeted ads. Things like that are so effective to acquire new audiences. So then with the growth funnel, so I talked about the growth funnel in the first book, I expanded it in the second book, and I added it to this new model that I put together called the fundraising disc model.
Right.
If you remember me talking about before,
yes.
Digital integration for strategic collaboration, fundraising disc model, it pulls all of this together. So at a glance, you can see how digital fundraising fits within the traditional development and fundraising department. So in addition to that, I tried to make it very easy to absorb the content. So I have a quick start guide at the end that pulls all of this together. I explain how there's digital campaigns, like a digital fundraiser might be working on a Giving Tuesday, a year end, or engagement campaigns or online stewardship or whatever. But also there are digital tools that support traditional development channels, and that is also so important. So using ads for planned giving, using emails for major donor communicate, So I outline all of this, and then I also include a digital fundraising maturity scorecard at the end. This is broken out into 7 categories because I outline the 7 characteristics of a successful and sophisticated digital fundraising organization.
Now, this is the part that's going to scare programs right now. They're being evaluated. So, yes, what are those? Can you kind of briefly give us those components?
Yeah.
And then they have to take the test.
Right.
Yes.
Well, it's a very simple yes or no.
Okay.
It's not meant to be intimidating. What it's meant to do is to show, yes, we're doing great in very many things, but here are some other things that we maybe want to think about.
Right.
So, for example, one of the characteristics that I have for a successful program is strong foundations and online presence. So what I had talked about before, starting at the beginning, is your donation form optimized? Is it streamlined? Does your website convey, your mission effectively? Do you have your donation form above the fold on your website? Little things like that. So these...
Well, they're little things, but they're really
They make
important.
a big difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So... You know what this is about. I mean, in addition to being able to hear about the book, other people being able to hear about it, hopefully buying the book, reading the book, employing it, this is also about you. So my first question is, why? Why is this important to you? I mean, you have the knowledge in your head, but that doesn't necessarily command you to share it with people. This is a particular moment in time for not just for digital, but for you. Why this book? Why now?
I know, that is such an interesting question. I often think about this. I think it's just my personality of, if there's an unanswered question, I want it to be answered. I don't, I think even when even in my work, if there's something that's not quite right, I want to get in there and fix it. So, when I started, doing my presentations about what we were doing at the food bank, and so many people had questions, I wanted to answer all of those questions. I couldn't leave it unfinished. I had to make sure that people knew that, I almost felt guilty if I didn't answer the question. So, for example, I did a Chronicle of Philanthropy webinar a couple of years ago on engagement, and I did this in partnership with another organization, and so I handled more of the engagement tactics. She handled more of the planning. Anyway, there were 180 questions that people had, and for a webinar you only have time for 3. And I'm there are 180 people that are not getting their questions answered. So I went through, they sent me all of the questions. I went through all of the questions. I pulled out the ones that I could answer. And I literally, I don't know, I think I maybe took 2 or 3 weekends and I answered 76 of the questions. Wow. And then I posted it, and then I categorized them into, groupings. And I put that on my blog, and I sent it out in emails I've answered your question. You don't have to worry about not having this knowledge.
Okay, why do you think that people were suddenly asking those questions? Is it just because you provided a form for it? What was this giant water dam of questions that was built up that they suddenly needed to ask. Why weren't they asking them before?
Well, I think first of all, there's not really a venue for them to do that. Because we have these presentations, because we do these things and say, what questions do you have? It gives them, first of all, the space to, here's where I can answer my question. Here I can vent all of my frustrations that I'm having with my organization right here in this webinar because you're talking about it and I can't solve it. So I think that's the first thing, you're giving them space. I think the second thing is that even as you're going through the presentation, it brings up questions like, well, I don't think I could do that. Like for my engagement part, I used some of my campaigns that I had done before as sort of case studies to support what I was talking about. And, immediately people are saying, well, you're just PBS, you're too big, or you're WHYY, you're too, you have all these resources, you could do this. And so then it's like, no, that's not really what I'm saying though. I'm just showing, demonstrating what it looks like when all of this is pulled together, let's take a step back and everyone has a little bit of, and I think that's why I address it in the book also, is that you'll have some organizations that have really strong email support. You'll have other organizations who have, really great social media support. They have someone on their team that's doing great. And then you have others who don't have either of those. So everyone has a little bit of a different, scenario that they're dealing with. And so I think that's why it elicits so many questions. They see one thing and think immediately, oh, well, I can't do that because, I don't have this, I don't have that. Well, actually, yes, you can. You can put these campaigns together that don't necessarily have to have all of these things,
right.
But it's demonstrating how a campaign is put together, how you are reaching these audiences. And so I describe that in the book too. You can choose 2 or 3 of these tactics and put together a very small engagement campaign, even for just a day or 2. It doesn't have, or guess what? You can go on the other side of it and have a 6-week engagement campaign with its own email newsletter and events and all of the things that, that we did. Like it's a scale, it's
right.
meant to be scaled. So I think that's why I think just because you're presenting the content, it just brings up more questions that they maybe hadn't thought about before. Like, oh, I love what you're saying, but I can't imagine how I would do that.
I love questions. I mean, obviously, we like to ask people questions.
Yeah.
What is the question you wish they would ask you now? Because even with the 180 questions and the answering 70, some odd of them, there are probably some questions that if they were asked, it would really drive some change. More people to read the book, but also more people to take time to make a change within their organizations. What should people really be asking right now?
Yeah, gosh, that's such a good question. I think that the question that they should really be asking themselves, I would have to say, going back to the digital fundraising maturity scorecard that I have, is what is the self-assessment that we could be doing to really evaluate where we are and what is possible for our future. I guess maybe how can we take a look at what we're doing, and without judgment, without immediately jumping to, we don't have the resources, we don't have the staff, we don't have the training. Within the self-assessment, what are we doing really well? What are the small incremental things changes that we could make that would move the needle? And then how can we be looking toward the future to keep building and have, a goal of one day we would love to have a digital fundraising director that is solely focused on a comprehensive program. So probably the self-assessment question, how can we be looking at ourselves and because I do think that there are pieces that organizations are doing and they're doing really well, but it's not pulled together in a comprehensive way. So how can we be a little bit more intentional about that?
This has all been the context really of public broadcasting, but these messages are resonant for the entirety of fundraising. And that's why you were speaking to the board. It's not just because you received this prize. It's also because the messages, the content is really meaningful to all of us in the sector. But that also begs the question, if that's where we are now, and these are the things where people are kind of catching up all the time, what is it that you're anticipating? What are the questions you're asking yourself that hopefully then are going to become a part of not just the next book, but the next time you talk to organizations and say, these are some of the things we need to be doing for the future. What are the things you're asking of the industry?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the next big question that we're going to be facing is what is the impact of AI on what we're doing? One of the things I really want to dive into is the decline in SEO because of the answer engines, and how that is going to, because there's so much that is required from a digital marketing standpoint to feed into digital fundraising, that if we don't have those elements, it's going to be very difficult to acquire new digital audiences. I mean, we're already seeing like the decline in, social media, like use it, or different ways that things are being used on social media because of the algorithms. Like they just said at the M&R benchmarks meeting last week that follower counts don't matter anymore, because of the algorithms. Like it's more important that you're looking at your content and engagement on those pieces of content, because that's what's being prioritized in on the social media platforms, not based on your follower count. So those little pieces that are so important for digital fundraising that are changing very quickly. Yeah. I think those are the next two big things that I am really going to be diving into, not only with stations, but with my work with other nonprofits as well, is what should we be thinking about now to make sure that we're still pulling in the audiences that we need to, so that we can cultivate them as donors.
You've been doing this work, again, for a while now, but what brought you to the work as a whole, not just digital? But why are you doing this work in the sector? Because if you're the kind of person who likes to answer questions, that you don't like to leave things undone, why in this world? And where did that come from? And where's that going?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because, like many others, I did not start out as a fundraiser. I was, in the travel industry. I worked for United Airlines for a while. I was in, hotel and hospitality. And I just happened to get a job at an association management firm for nonprofits. And so we were working with national nonprofits in the Combined Federal Campaign. That's another thing that I'm very concerned about, is the decline of the Combined Federal Campaign. And I often think about my former association management company and how they're handling it. But
I think they're still frozen, aren't they? The Combined Federal Campaign,
are they? So, yeah. So those challenges are happening. But I think there were two elements, I think, that just so perfectly fit within what I was doing at that company, and what I just loved working with the organization. I mean, I was just inspired. We worked with over 150 different national nonprofits, and they were in these different categories. Right. So we had animal nonprofits, the children's charities, the conservation, and it was just very personally rewarding to, be serving them and helping them advance their mission. So that was the first time that I was really exposed to all of the great work that all of these amazing charities are doing, and I just felt good about what I was doing, there. The other element was the technical side of things. I started off, like I said before, just in office management, but then I started doing database management and processing donor names and coming up, creating donor thank you letters that were aligned with the Combined Federal Campaign donor for the nonprofits. And I created within, back then we were using FileMaker Pro.
Oh, yeah.
And back then, I opened the manual and I figured out how to write a script so that all of the names that we got from all of the Combined Federal Campaigns could go into this database. Oh, wow. Scripts were written, and so there was this technical side of it thing. So then we could output the files, instead of like cutting them up in little pieces of paper and sending them to 150 different charities, we had names on diskette.
Wow.
Donor names on diskette.
Oh, I'm just imagining somebody listening to this who was born after the year 2000 or something and wondering
diskette?
What is a diskette?
So then, then I put together like a manual, and I had to do training, and that was another element that I really loved, like putting the instruction together.
Yeah.
So there was just something that sort of, those elements just really fell together, and that's, where, and so when I started at the food bank, I actually was the database manager, and then it just quickly evolved because digital, I think because of more of my technical, acumen and that area that I love so much, that just kind of emerged, and I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time, I guess, and all of the talents that I have were just put to good use.
So where do you imagine this going for you next? Not just in terms of this particular project in this book, but just what would you like to take on?
Well, I think that I probably will not rest until I see more nonprofit. Well, I understand that that this is really that small nonprofits are really still struggling,
yes.
And I don't know that they're getting the support that they need, and so I think that I'll be doing this for a while. But at some point, yes, I would love to see more of the smaller and mid-sized nonprofits just naturally doing these things. And I think that it will happen because I think that newer fundraisers that are coming into the sector, they're digital natives, they're growing up in a digital landscape. They naturally understand it. So I think that's going to be a really great push for our sector also, is that all of these new minds and new voices are coming in, and that it will at some point become a lot easier for small and mid-sized nonprofits because they'll have people who have those skills and understand it inherently.
Well, that's it for this episode of the PM Podcast. You can learn more about Jen Newmeyer, her books, podcast, newsletter, and consulting work at CharityJen.com. and about the AFP Skystone Partners Prize for Research on Fundraising and Philanthropy at afpglobal.org, as well as at skystonepartners.com. Our thanks to our sponsor, Evertrue, the global leader in donor engagement and fundraising intelligence, helping nonprofits find, engage, and inspire their supporters. Our producer is Jack Frost, and our theme music is Moving Out, Moving In by Jay Taylor, courtesy of Epidemic Sound. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe and check out our sister shows, Frontlines of Social Good and How to Raise, all part of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Until next time, I'm Jay Frost. Thanks for joining me.